Hello, friends. So Hank Green just released a video about comparing why he thinks weed is better than gambling, and I have a few thoughts. So let's get into it. So obviously, I will start this out being like big old weed smoker here, and if you somehow ended up here without knowing who Hank Green is, I will just mention that he is a science educator on primarily YouTube, but other mediums as well. Pretty much the science educator on YouTube. So if you don't know who he is, that's kind of surprising. But anyway, so he releases this video, and for him, it's more or less a thought experiment on why it is that he thinks this is less harmful than gambling. And goes through a whole bunch of different arguments about why he feels the way he feels. Then he reaches out to other people to get their thoughts on it. And, you know, to him, the video is mainly about like challenging his own biases and, you know, how he kind of goes through his thought process. And one thing I never heard mentioned anywhere in the video, anywhere, the medical uses of marijuana, which you would think would be something you'd want to talk about when you're talking about the relative merits of two different things. You know, I don't think that it's irrelevant that, you know, there are legitimate medical uses of cannabis, but they're not of gambling. And the fact that that was never even mentioned is kind of bizarre to me, right? Because surely somebody had to have brought it up. You know, he asked bunches of people on Blue Sky and Twitter. Nobody mentioned the medical uses of marijuana. Very strange. The thing is, I've been both a medical and a recreational user. And they're very different things, let me tell you. So, when I was growing up, I really, really had trouble falling asleep. Always. I remember a time when I was in college that I had a test the next day and I could not get to sleep. No matter how hard I tried, I was tired, just laying there in bed doing nothing, and just it wouldn't happen. And I could not turn my brain off, you know? I have ADD, and that's just sometimes that's how it is for me. You can't turn your brain off. And it wasn't until I was maybe halfway through college that I discovered the medicinal use of marijuana to help me sleep. I tried sleeping medications, I've tried all sorts of things, and this is what actually helps. I spent all of my life struggling with insomnia until I became a habitual marijuana user. And that's very frustrating to me that at the time it was completely illegal, basically everywhere. And so it was always very difficult to be able to get a hold of some. And so there was a time when I was in my second college that, you know, I couldn't get any. And you know what I found out? I'm not a drinker, but I started drinking wine. I drank like, I'd get a big old gallon of rosé and just drink on that every night. And I'm just like, this is so strange, like I found something that works for me, but I can't get it. And so then I'm going to reach out to another vice instead. I didn't like that about myself. And so I stopped it eventually. And I never drank till I was drunk, just drink a little bit to try to get myself the sort of benefit that I could get easily by smoking a joint or a bowl or whatever. The other thing that I really feel like we have to talk about with relation to Hank's video is that he says that weed has been broadly decriminalized. And I can understand where he lives, why he would feel that way. But it's not true. There's a lot of states where weed isn't legal. There's a lot of states where it's only available medicinally. And, just being like, well, I feel like that is sort of a oversimplification that also kind of overlooks the complex nature of cannabis in this country. Many people are aware that mostly the reason cannabis became illegal where alcohol did not was cultural. That there was this idea that marginalized people, minorities, were the ones who smoked weed, and so you could, control them better if you make it illegal, because then you basically always have a reason to arrest them. Nixon said as much, right? It gives him a reason that he can go after the hippies and the blacks because, they were the people who were perceived to smoke weed. Now, in all all actuality, I'd say people all over the spectrum smoke weed. It's just the people who are going to get arrested for it are typically going to be counterculture or minorities, I mean, it's just the way it is. And so, yeah, that's a really complicated feature here because I think there's a lot of that inherent racism and, uh, anti-conformity. I don't know, like the deviants of society are the ones who use that marijuana, that devil's weed. And so there's that sort of ingrained thing in most Americans to think of weed as bad just because of that, because it's part of the culture in a lot of ways. And I mean, the truth of the matter is there ain't a substance you can use that isn't going to hurt you. It would be foolish of me to assume that this couldn't hurt me or that there aren't side effects that'll hurt me. I know it's not lung cancer. They've tried really hard to link this to lung cancer and they can't do it, but I know it's not that. But there's some things. I'm not going to say that there isn't some side effects that are undesirable, because of course there are. When you smoke, that's going to cause you problems. And the only reason that I smoke joints like this is because I physically can't do anything else, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, so, I feel like there was a lot that he left out in the video about the cultural reasoning that a lot of people have and biases that we have. He talked about research. And it's funny to me because a lot of the reason we don't have a lot of research on the effects of cannabis is because of the way the government was so, suppressive for so long. And the United States government is pretty influential in what sort of science gets done, even outside of our borders, right? And so there's just not as much. I mean, there's plenty of research that has tried to link marijuana to cancer and has failed because that's something people want to prove, right? That would be good for the government if they could prove that there was some sort of link to cancer there, because that would give them reasoning, simple, easy reasoning to be like, oh, we have to make this illegal. You could get lung cancer, right? Well, no. But the bigger picture stuff with weed was definitely overlooked. And of course, I'm not a gambler. I will say that I have gambled in the past. My grandparents, my mom's parents, were huge Vegas fans. They used to go to Vegas all the time. My grandma liked to go out on the gambling boats out of Port Canaveral down here in Central Florida, and play the nickel slots. And, I went with her sometimes to do that, and it was fun. Good buffet, right? Get to ride a boat, not too bad. But, I would go on there with like 20 bucks and I would use that to gamble. And if it was gone, I was done. And if I came away with the same amount of money that I left with, I considered that a win. Like I didn't expect to win anything. And I didn't really care to lose the little amount of money that I was willing to gamble, because gambling just isn't that satisfactory to me. I don't, psychologically, it doesn't do for me what it does for a lot of other people. And it would be churlish of me to pretend like that's not the case, right? And so, you know, when trying to do a comparison between the two things, it is important not just to point out what he missed in the bigger picture about the benefits and the way that marijuana is used that he wasn't really talking about, but also gambling. Now, this is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I haven't really been had the headspace to put it all together. Holidays and having my goddaughter here is just really, I don't have the like intellectual energy to be able to really put everything together the way I'd like to. But I'm going to go ahead and get into it here, because I feel like this is an important part of the broader discussion that he also missed. And I would like to say that I think we, the United States, the average person in this country, is overlooking the insane amount. And I don't use that word lightly, because I don't like to use it as a pejorative or anything. But I mean, it's just, it is beyond comprehension. The amount of influence that comes from gambling money in our current political system. I started noticing it in the run up to the election, where you'd start seeing well known streamers like Aiden Ross having a lot of interaction with Donald Trump. And that alarms me, because people like that Aiden Ross guy, a lot of their money comes from illegal offshore gambling that they entice their American-based, often underaged users into getting into, and potentially even getting addicted to. And when you start seeing people who are fueled by that kind of money also being very influential with politicians, that is extremely concerning, you know? CoffeeZilla, if you don't know who that is, he's a wonderful internet journalist here on YouTube. He's doing an in-depth investigation into Counter-Strike gambling. And, it's a phenomenon that I wasn't really aware of until his investigation, but it doesn't surprise me because I've seen and heard of other things that are similar to that with other types of sort of fronts. But basically, what it is it's a video game. Young boys, mostly, playing this game are going to be exposed to these streamers for the first time who are talking about gambling. And then they're going to go try gambling with these items themselves because it is a way that you sort of can be onboarded into gambling without having to verify your identity or to use like US currency as your medium that you're gambling. And it's obviously, as I'm watching CoffeeZilla's piece here, you're seeing that it is a damaging thing that is affecting our young men and boys. And we are broadly, as a society, unaware of it. And it all goes back to gambling. Gambling is something where everyone knows the casino has an edge. The casino's always going to win in the long run. But beyond that, it's also something that offers nothing to society at all other than revenue extraction. When they talk about the positive aspects of gambling, what do they talk about? They talk about people having more money available. Oh, it's good for the local economy. It's good for jobs. It's good for this. It's good for that. It's just revenue extraction. There's lots of different ways that you can extract revenue that are not necessarily that, potentially addictive and harmful to your community, Like, it's just very strange. And this is the point where I want to circle back to the real big picture with marijuana. Because I don't function without it these days. I can't. I'm in so much pain all the time. It never stops. And I'm also, my pain, a lot of it is here in my upper abdomen. And I cannot eat until I have smoked a lot. Like, more than I wish that I needed to smoke, by a substantial margin. These joints that I roll with my little pre-roll, probably 3 or 4 of them before I can stand to eat in the day. And that's important for me because I cannot take my medications on an empty stomach. There's medications I take that if I try to take them on an empty stomach, it will make me feel so much more sick and possibly not even be able to tolerate keeping them down, So, or getting them down in the first place, to be honest. So, this is a necessary thing for me to be even able to function the marginal amount that I am able to function in my life. Not because of a psychological need, a real physiological need. I need it to settle this enough that I can kind of start doing something with the rest of my day. And that didn't used to be the case for me. Like, when I was a recreational user primarily, obviously still using the effects of it to help me sleep when I was having insomnia. So, there was an element of self-medication at that point, but when primarily, when I was smoking, it was recreational. I was the kind of person that I'd get off work and I'd smoke and have a nice time. I didn't like being at school or work high ever. But it's funny to me to hear Hank Green say he eats an edible and feels dull the next day, because to me that was always the good part about weed, is that you didn't really have any next day effects. If you like drink the next day, you're going to be hungover. But for me, I never had the problem where I felt it the next day, except with edibles. So what Hank Green doesn't realize there is that his limited experience with cannabis use, primarily eating edibles, is giving him a mistaken impression of the way that marijuana works in general. The reason a lot of people smoke and not eat edibles, Hank Green, is because smoking marijuana and the effects that smoking marijuana have on the body are quite different than eating it. There's what we call a head high and a body high. This gives you the head high. And the head high doesn't have those long-term stuff generally. Whereas body high, I think maybe it just still lasts longer. I don't know. It takes longer to kick in. It takes about half an hour after you eat before you start feeling it. Whereas this is pretty much immediate, right? So that was something that bothered me while I was watching the video. I'm like, oh, honey. Oh. You don't know this. Okay. But I'm not the only person in the world that gets medical benefit from marijuana. My dad worked with medically fragile, mentally impaired children. Like, he was a teacher and that was his job. And he had kids who had epilepsy, and it was just a nightmare. They were just always having seizures. And of course, then you have to keep them physically safe. And, it's a hard condition to manage, especially with children, and especially within intellectually disabled children. Well, one thing that's really good for epilepsy that was not available to children when he was working with them? Marijuana, cannabis. And there's no other drug that does what it does when it comes to epilepsy. I mean, it can literally take a child whose life is, living hell and turn it into just normal childhood. Yeah. Like, there are lots of conditions where this neuropathy, there are a lot of severe, difficult medical conditions where this is the best medicine available. And it has been made broadly unavailable for those purposes for most of my lifetime. And the other thing that Hank Green sort of glossed over is the fact that there are places where marijuana is available. It's not fully illegal, but it's made available as a medical marijuana only. And that's how it is here in Florida. And so, I have my medical card, and it's not difficult for me to get marijuana, to use marijuana for my, physical issues, except it is. because the state has all these weird rules about how much you can have at any time and how much you can have per month. And it's such a hassle. You have to pay the state every few, I forget how long it is. It's more than twice a year. It's a lot of money that you have to pay in order to get and maintain your medical marijuana card here. And so while it is, available to me, if, say, I didn't have the money available to me, or the, you know, ability to jump through all these hoops constantly, because it's like every 7 months you have to go see the doctor. Like, that's such a pain. Let me tell you, that is such a pain for me. But, like, if you can't do all that, it's still illegal for you, right? And so there are people who have conditions where this would be the best thing to help them. And it is unavailable to them, even in my state where it's available to me, because they don't have the resources to jump through all those hoops. And the funny thing about that is, who are the people who are unlikely to have resources? Disabled people. So what does that mean? Disabled people who might be benefited by having medical marijuana made available to them? A lot of them can't get it. Oh, that's so annoying to me. So no, I don't think it's fair to say that marijuana is broadly decriminalized. I just don't think that it's fair to say that, because that kind of spits in the face of the people who it's not decriminalized for, that are still in legal jeopardy if they choose to try to use the item that will actually help them, the medicine that will actually help them. Now, my dad has his medical card in West Virginia, and it's a joke, you know? There just aren't that many stores available, and what they have is really overpriced and not very good quality. And, that's the best that's available in the entire state of West Virginia, is this, like, terrible system that he's stuck in. Because he has neuropathy. So, it's hard. It's really hard to think about the fact that there are people who need this substance, medically need this substance, that are denied it because of ridiculous, social misunderstandings or biases, things like that. It makes me want to, like, scream. Honestly, it does. And gambling is, I don't know, gambling is sneaking in the back door, and has been sort of backdoor legalized. Like, I think it's maybe a little more fair for Hank Green to say that it's broadly decriminalized, because we all know people use VPNs for online gambling, right? I mean, I think that's not hard to believe, right? If you'll use a VPN to pretend that you're in a different country so that you can see more things on Netflix, then why wouldn't you use a VPN to, get around gambling laws if that's what you wanted to do? You know? And so I think gambling is pretty accessible pretty much everywhere in the United States. And it's just revenue extraction. That's all it does. It does not benefit the end user in any way. It's just revenue extraction. One thing that's really different about living here in Florida and living in West Virginia where I grew up is that money comes into Florida. Money only ever goes out of West Virginia. When we sell our resources, the companies that benefit, they're not based in West Virginia. And usually the people who own those companies don't live in West Virginia, right? Their taxes, their everyday largesse does not come to us. I think that people forget in the United States that we are states. And there are winners and losers when it comes to states. And West Virginia is one of the biggest losers. And gambling is the last thing that West Virginia needs. We do not need more revenue extraction. But there was a time that I thought West Virginia could really use marijuana. When recreational marijuana was starting to roll out mostly in the West, I thought, if West Virginia were the first recreational state out east, we could start bringing money back into West Virginia. People would come to smoke and then would enjoy the wonderful recreational activities that are available there, probably want to come back. And it would become, maybe something they get in the habit of doing. And then as recreational becomes more broadly available across the eastern seaboard, we'd lose that competitive edge, but people would still already have the, exposure to our state, maybe continue coming. And of course that didn't happen because West Virginia doesn't ever do anything that's in its actual interest politically. But I'm just saying, these two things are not the same. Hank Green. And the starter grade Squishmallow that I have here, I named him Hank Green for a reason. Because I like Hank Green. He's taught me a lot. But on this subject, he's just wrong.